What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Real Estate Moguls. My name is Grant Findlay-Shirras, and on today's show, we have the CEO of Moxi Works, York Baur, who is also the founder of a movie production company, the VP of Sales and Marketing for the iconic Space Needle in Seattle, the CMO of a sales SaaS software, and if you check him out on LinkedIn, the guy's resume is first rate. He has been living and breathing tech and sales for decades. And he's the reason why Moxi Works is the platform that makes up to 10% of all transactions in the US happen. So that is huge, and this interview is going to be huge, so take some notes and let's get started. So thank you, York, for being on the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So let's help everyone kind of get to know you a little bit, because you've been around the block and you've been really successful in business. So what's your story, and nowadays, what is motivating you in your career?
Well, my story, as you've already correctly noted, is pretty twisted tale there. I started with a computer science degree, so I love technology, and I always have been a science and technology-minded person. But I learned pretty early on that the bridge between technology and the human relationship experience is really where it's at, and at least it is for me. So if you look back at my career, while I started technically, most of my career has been in, as you've noted, more sales and marketing around technology and how we help people and businesses be better as a result of using technology. To me, it's not about the technology itself, it's about the use of it and how that makes people's lives better. So really for me, that continues to be what drives me. A lot of my more recent career, as you noted, is in SaaS technologies that help salespeople be better, and we're in a real estate context here, so that's what all of us are doing every day, and we're trying to help agents do, is be better salespeople, and that's really still where my passion lies.
When you look at there's a lot of vertical software in real estate because there's nuances to this industry, and there's a lot of really cool tech companies out there that serve the startup land and B2B enterprise land that have some really cool software for those customers. Have you ever seen some stuff that you try to glean from as you build really great tech for the real estate space?
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes back to what I said. It's really not so much about the technologies. I think it all has to start, and it does for me and for us as Moxi, with understanding your customer. I have a tremendous, and we as a company have a tremendous wind at our backs, and in this the way that we were founded. So we were a spin out of a large West Coast U.S. brokerage called Windermere. Originally it was a technology unit for a couple decades actually within Windermere that got spun out to create what is now Moxi Works. And so today on my board and as one of our key customers, we still have Windermere. We also have Long & Foster and Howard Hanna that have subsequently become investors and after becoming customers. So it's this tremendous luxury because we as a company, and I even personally, can be in these dialogues between these industry titans in brokerage. And that's the trigger in almost all cases for the thinking that then leads to the products that we build. So we don't try to chase the latest shiny object. It's more about understanding our customer really well and listening through the solutions they often propose. And this is advice I'd give any product person, and particularly any startup. You want to listen to the market. That sounds obvious, but a lot of times customers will tell you what they think the solution is, and you have to sort of listen through that for what the problem is that they're actually trying to solve. Because if you're in the brokerage game, for instance, you're really good at running a brokerage. You may not be so great at envisioning technology solutions. That's what we do for a living. So it's the most important advice I could give on that is listen very intently to your customer, but do so reading through to what the problem is, because it's up to us to come up with a better way to solve that problem than they may have envisioned for themselves.
So what are some of the things that you are hearing, maybe implicitly, not explicitly, from customers and from the marketplace, as what are these problems that they're still having that need to be solved?
Sure. There are actually a number of them come to mind, probably the most fundamental. And I have, as you pointed out, an eclectic background. I joke about being a Northwest software company refugee, kind of moving around from company to company. Although I've been at Moxi 7 years, by the way, which is 3 years longer I've been anywhere else, so you can tell I've found my happy place there. But through that experience, I've ended up working with almost every other industry, and there's the companies that I've worked for have sold to essentially every industry that there is globally, and almost all industries have solved their data integration problems by creating common platforms that are open platforms, meaning where it's an ecosystem that allows all sorts of different and often competing vendors to play, where may the best person win in terms of the individual product category, but they're all exchanging data for a better set of data for that customer to operate on. And that really has been absent in our mind, at least, in real estate, and particularly at the brokerage level. And with the Moxi Cloud in our case, but that's the problem we're trying to solve, is provide a data platform that allows not only our own products to interoperate, but that those products now have 50 other partner companies to also use and contribute to the data in that platform. So to me, that's probably the number one thing that we need to help the industry solve, because, and I'm sure you have experienced this in your own world, in the own businesses that you run, the data really is the key that unlocks so many other things in terms of automation. You know, we're here at Inman in Las Vegas. There are all these announcements of, you know, what is Amazon doing, and Zillow was on stage yesterday, and there's this fear around all that. Well, all those businesses are really doing this, right? They're using various forms of data, in some cases that have been given to them by the real estate industry. The industry can do that themselves, and we're certainly one of the vendors that's trying to help the industry do that for itself. Yeah,
that's cool. Okay, so some people may not know what Moxi Works is if they're living under a rock, because I know you guys are a big company. But so for people who kind of don't know what it is, what is the high level of what you guys do?
Sure. One of the things that is both a personal philosophy, but that it was an outgrowth of our early relationship as a part of Windermere, is that relationships trump technology. So our whole ethos is to make agents great with the people they know, and brokerages great with the agents they know. And when you boil that down into how we do that, it's basically two categories. The first is a great set of agent tools that are sphere-centric, and in particular are homeowner and seller-centric. One of the great conundrums for me personally in this industry is, if you ask any agent or any manager, any brokerage owner, what would you rather have, a seller or a buyer? Almost universally, they'll say, I'd prefer a seller. And yet so much of the technology is oriented to buyers and buyer leads and buyer search and all these buyer things. We've taken a contrarian approach, which is, let's make tools that make the agent great with the people they already know, most of whom are homeowners, most of whom will transact if that agent just stands out as the one they know. So it's a pretty simple philosophy. There's a lot more to it than that, but we have a variety of products that do that at the agent level. And then, as I already mentioned, we have this platform that we call the Moxi Cloud that not only enables those products to be great, but now, as I said, over 50 partner companies, many of whom, by the way, are here at Inman, that are utilizing that data, of course with the broker's consent, but using and exchanging and enriching that mutual data set between our products and theirs. So that's what we do.
So for all the real estate tech startups out there who may want to become a partner, what are the reasons why people become a partner? Are there certain types of companies that are well suited for this versus others that are not? Talk to me about the partners that you have.
It's a great question, and I have a very strong philosophical belief about platforms. I think the word platform, is an abused term in our industry. Everybody's got a platform, which in most cases means they have a product, or frankly, in the case of some startups, and I don't mean this as a disparagement, they're just so small, they really have what boils down to a feature almost to someone else's product. But to us, a platform is, we use that term in the strict sense of the word. So for instance, Microsoft Windows for those geezers, that's a platform. It's an operating system, right, that facilitates other applications running on it. Your iPhone that we have in our pockets, the iOS operating system on that phone is the platform, right? So, and then the App Store is where you get your apps. So that's how we view platforms. And if you're truly an open platform, what that means is you have to be willing to allow anyone on it. And I'll come back to the definition of anyone in a moment. But you can't be sort of kind of when we feel like it may be open. You have to either be open or you're not open, right? Okay. And so we don't have a discriminatory partner program, which is why I think we have these 50 partners and growing. By the way, all of whom have a contractual relationship with us, because this is serious stuff, right? We're shepherding our clients, the brokers and their agents' data. So we take that very seriously, and it's always under the broker's control as to who, which of our partners get that data, only with their consent, can be turned off at any time, et cetera. So we feel like we have a responsibility to bring quality companies into that. But in terms of the types of things they do, it's a tremendous smorgasbord. Everything from DocuSign that is doing obviously very hardcore transaction-oriented things, through to gifting companies and companies that will help you move, and marketing companies and print companies. There's all this richness there. And each of them needs some subset of the data that we have. And I'll put a further perspective on it. We have today 90% of the home sale footprint lives in the data in the Moxi cloud. So almost every application out there that a third party might have needs access to some form of the property data. Rather than having to stub their toe on the challenges with the MLS data, which are huge barriers to entry for many, particularly smaller companies, and are a huge expense even for larger companies, that problem's solved on the Moxi cloud. Once they're integrated, we flip a switch, the data's there. And so on for the brokerage data and, crucially, the consumer data that the agents need to work with.
What's your geographic coverage? Do you serve agent brokerages all over the United States?
We do. We are a national company now. We have 130,000 agents across 75 enterprise brokerage companies that use our platform and products. And actually, in your neck of the woods, we have our first Canadian customer in Toronto. So
yeah? Which one?
I can't say the name. We have a non-disclosure there, so apologies. But excited to be in Canada.
Now, why don't you just launch everywhere? Like, what's preventing you, even with a big company that you have, from just being in every state, province, city?
It's a great question. Increasingly, we are in North America. As I mentioned, we have over 90% of the home sale footprint. So the reason we do is that we have customers in all of those areas. And one of our partners also, by the way, is Leading Real Estate Companies of the World. I believe you had them on the program.
Yeah.
And they have also a national footprint. And we continue to work with them. We're actually a supplier of their cloud infrastructure technology.
Oh, cool.
This Moxi cloud helps power their Leading RE cloud, as they call it. But they actually have, as you probably know from talking to them, a global footprint. And so we do have aspirations to grow globally. But again, maybe advice for companies. And I've made this mistake in my career. If you try to go too fast, too soon, you can really, fight a multi-front war and lose the whole thing.
Yeah.
So we've been very, very deliberate and very cautious about expanding outside of North America until we feel like we're good and ready to do so. But we would look to organizations like Leading RE to help us with that, because they've figured out already, how business is done globally. It's very different, as you may know. It's very different outside of North America. So.
Now, you guys have built technologies, you guys have bought technologies, you guys partner with other companies. How do you decide which approach to take?
Boy, that's the $64 million question there. I think it comes down to a few things. I think it's very dangerous to be a not invented here company if you're, and we see this not only in this industry but others. If you pretend like you can build everything, one of two things will happen. Either you won't be able to go fast enough, or you will build subpar projects. You just can't be good at everything. No company or person is good at everything, which leads you down the partner and or buy route. And in those cases, I think you need to be very selective and cautious. As we've already talked about a little bit with our partner program, as I mentioned, we're not punitive. We let people into the program, but in terms of things that we would incorporate into our own products or put the Moxi name onto, we're very highly selective. And it's not just the product. This is something else I think that is often overlooked. It's the cultural fit between our companies. So the number of our partners that are here, we've had great ongoing conversations. We've been partners for, in some cases, years. But you have to keep reinvesting in that relationship, because a lot of what determines how our companies work together is not the technology, but rather the teams working in the field, the account management groups, the way we support them in the technology discussion, and so on. So I feel like if I have advice, it's invest, particularly for people that are maybe younger in their careers that haven't maybe fully understood the value of relationship building yet. That's a crucial part of how you build long-term partnerships. You have to reinvest in that relationship, just like you do with a spouse or anything else, right?
Now, that culture mixing, when you do want to merge or acquire, do they have to be like exactly the same, or so close you could hardly tell the difference between the cultures in the two companies? Or is it like, hey, we're merging or we're acquiring you because you're not where you need to be, and our culture will actually help you get to where you need to be? And needs to then be some communication plan to make sure that people in one company don't fear that their lifestyle and quality of life is going to change. Like how does that thing work? Because like I recently went through a conversation with a company to acquire them, and the cultures were different, and I looked at them and I said, well, you're about to go out of business, I think, because of your culture, and I think our hustle culture might help you make more money with your product. So what have been your experiences and lessons learned in that mix?
Boy, we could probably have an hour-long conversation just on that one. It's a very astute question on your part because, as I've often said, so much of the focus in those types of transactions is around the signing. And like, oh, we did all this work. Because it is a lot of work to get to the point where you're signing an agreement. But in my mind, the erroneous view of that is that somehow the value is created at that point of signature. It's actually, that's not the end. That's the beginning of a hopeful process of creating value over a long period of time, because it's not guaranteed, which is why, as you probably know, most of them fail, at least fail in the form of achieving the potential that everyone saw for doing the deal in the first place. So to me, it's a complex topic that there probably isn't some blanket answer, but I would love to give you some thoughts. I think the first thing is the cultures do not need to be the same, at least in all ways. I do think opposites attract, as much like in our own personal lives. A lot of times you get a 1 + 1 = 3, and I wish, as a society, by the way, I wish we would not be so divisive in our conversations as we seem to be right now, because to me, that diversity, not just the headline forms of diversity that we all are seeing in the media, but diversity of personality type, socioeconomic background, upbringing, even within the US, for instance, regions in the country that you might have grown up in, or even in our state, right? There's these massive differences. So that form of diversity, I actually think, is a strength. And back to companies emerging, if you have different experiences as companies, that can be a tremendous strength. However, what you have to assure, in my view, is fundamental agreement and alignment on core principles. So things like business ethics, obviously, but also who is your customer? Right? That can totally change the orientation of a culture. For instance, your business is focused on agents. Ours is focused on brokers. There's this whole thing that goes on differently based on those two orientations. One's not right or wrong. They're just very different. And then the final thing I would say is you have to have kind of a common goal, right? A common vision that you may be approaching it differently, but if you're aiming for the same place, that solves a lot of things. And then finally, I personally, is a very personal thing, but I think humor is an underappreciated aspect of culture and of bringing different people together. Cultural. I'm sure you've been in situations because you're in Toronto. It's an intensely multicultural place. I have a lot of personal experiences throughout my career where a person from a foreign culture injected a joke in English into a conversation, and it just totally transforms the conversation and the relationship. And that's hard to do as a foreigner in a foreign language, to inject humor. And that's just one example. But I'm concerned that a lot of the current things, we've really had to be careful about humor, which for unfortunate and largely good reasons. But let's not forget that it is a bridge building, human bridge building mechanism.
We as humans want to laugh, we want to smile, we want to have a good time, and sometimes we got to lighten up a little bit.
That's right.
Where do you guys want to go in the future? Like, what's in your sights? Before we kind of get into some future real estate brokerage models and startup macro stuff, for Moxi Works, where do you guys want to go in the future?
It's a great question. I feel like, my answer may underwhelm you and others. It's not, we're going to create nuclear fusion, part 3. It's frankly do more and better of largely what we're doing now. I feel like it's really, in many regards, maybe the second inning with regard to the true use of what is possible with technology in real estate, because real estate as an industry has been very, very late, which is a side note. People go, well, how can that be? Well, the answer is the relationships are so important, like with your doctor, right? The technology of interacting with your doctor is far less important than how you feel about interacting with your doctor. I feel like real estate's similar. So I feel like there's much more headroom, much more possibility for what we can do to help the industry of real estate, in our case, brokerage. So there's that. I do think also, and this is a controversial opinion probably based on different views that people might have of AI, artificial intelligence. I think it's be a long time coming before AI reaches the things that people are talking about in a fearful way today about, disintermediating the agent and so on. One of the benefits you have as a geezer like me is you've seen a lot of stuff, and I don't think any of us, and no doubt the same way, given that you're part of a technology-oriented business, that you have to be an optimist in order to do what we do. You just do. But with that optimism comes a lot of unrealism about timeframes. And so I feel like that's true with artificial intelligence. I think it will play an increasingly important role, and it will certainly automate a lot of things that are mundane today. I think we're just a long, long way from replacing the human interaction, and at least in the meaningful sense of it, around something as critical as a house transaction. So we're less focused on that. We're focused about doing what computers do well and taking that burden off the agent and the brokerage so the humans can do what they do well, which is have coffee with you, give you a thoughtful annual property valuation, know what's going on in your life and your kids' and family's life, and what does that mean in terms of your dreams and goals, and how does that affect your housing need, and the largest investment you have, and what else is going on in your financial picture. It's going to be a long time before the technology is doing all that. But if we can fuel that by taking away the burden and supplying the actionable data and decisions, serving those up to the human beings that are doing the hard part, we believe there's just a tremendous amount of headroom for us as a supplier to this industry to do that.
Before we go to the next subject, even when AI gets to where we all think it's going to be, it's a function of the data that goes into it, and humans are not putting everything in their head on the internet and in programs. There's so much going on in people's heads, and that's what an agent is trying to figure out and pull
Absolutely,
out.
And we happen to be today in the news on the day where Facebook was fined $5 billion with a B by the FTC for privacy violations. I don't know if you saw that, but and by the way, that's not a comment about Facebook. It's a comment about the nascency of the privacy discussion, because, by the way, the FTC is doing that on the basis of 100-year-old privacy standards. There's a whole thing to be figured out around privacy, and by that I'm talking about governmental standards, right? It just hasn't been modernized. So the reason I bring that up is I think the ability for the technology to access and use this stuff is probably actually going to stagnate because of this privacy discussion. And I'm a fan. I personally don't have anything to hide, and I think I get better experiences based on these systems using the data that I'm giving. But regardless of what your opinion is, I guess that's as you rightly point out, that's the fuel that allows these technologies to do what they do. And I'm not sure that's going to be as, the meteoric growth rate of that data is going to slow based on the privacy conversation.
Now, you're talking with brokerages, you work with brokerages, and that is a big what's going to happen to the brokerage business model. And so I'm sure you have some insights and thoughts based on what you're seeing with your customers on where these models are going. And is it a future of there's all these now new models and they're all going to have their own niche in the industry, and now technology is just going to help power all of them to be great in their own niche? Or is it one of the situations where some of these models are not going to work and there will be a couple that survive and win over time? What are your thoughts?
Well, two initial comments. One is my opinions do not necessarily represent those of the management. I'm not a broker, right? And secondly, if I were that smart, I probably wouldn't be sitting here doing this. No offense, but but you're right. When we have this unique vantage point because we deal with some of the biggest and best of the traditional brokerages in particular in North America, and I'm fortunate, as I mentioned, to have 3 of them as our investors. So I think I have a better seat in the auditorium, if you will, for this discussion maybe than others. But I guess what I'd say, and I'll come back to what I was mentioning earlier, I feel like the tendency right now in the media especially is to be dismissive of the traditional model in favor of the shiny new stuff. But having been a technology guy and having had my own startups, by the way, sometimes what seems a good idea just isn't. And it's not because people weren't smart, it's just you can't know until you try. And so I do believe that some of the models that seem great now, there will be some wreckage and carnage along the way. Others, even if the idea is right, they just will need a lot of refinement, and they won't come out the other end of the sausage machine looking the way they did on the way in. There's a ton of money being spent, in my opinion, too much money being spent right now, sort of being spammed around. If you look at what's going on with private equity funds and their growth, at just the sheer dollars, same thing on the venture capital side. There's just tremendous pressure. What everyone forgets is that these firms have taken someone else's money, and there's pressure now for them to deploy that money. Because if I put money into a fund, I don't want you just sitting on it. I could have done that in a bank. I want you to put it to work. So I think that's led to some overinvestment. That will lead to a lot of failed experiments. Keep in mind, you're talking to a guy that lived through the 99.com and 2000.bomb bubble and burst. It's a necessary form of experimentation in industry, but it leaves a lot of wreckage. What I'm leading up to, putting those two things together, is I think my personal view, at least, is that the traditional brokerage model will live on far better and far longer than everyone's given it credit for today. I think there'll be more carnage in the new models than people are willing to admit. Because keep in mind, we've also been in a 10-year expansion market in real estate. That's a big factor. But in the end, I do think it'll be a blend. And crucially, and this is, I think, from a ultimate consumer point of view, is the punchline. I do believe, because I see it every day in what we're trying to help these brokers do and how they're influenced by these pressures from these newcomers, it will make them better, and it will ultimately cause them to adapt and improve and generate a better consumer experience, which at the end of it is what powers the whole thing. And I think that's incredibly healthy for all involved.
Now, one of the things that you talked about earlier, and this is the core of your business, is you have platforms and technologies that help brokerages with the data create some new experience that's better for them, for the agents, for the consumers. And I know you've talked about one of your themes is brokerages do need to control their data. They do need to have ownership over the data. And one of my very controversial thoughts around it is ownership is an illusion. That there's no such thing as ownership. We don't really own anything in some existential way. And so let's stop talking about data ownership and just talk about usage and utilization of data and what to now do with data. When you think about the data that brokerages need to own, what is that data that you think they do need to own?
You know, that's a very interesting perspective, and maybe perhaps we need a cocktail to further explore that idea. I'm intrigued by what you're saying there, because it's funny. I actually agree with you offline, meaning I do think that the concept of ownership at an ethereal level it doesn't really exist. So I find that intriguing. As it pertains to the state, because you're right, I'm on record saying you need to own your data as a brokerage. I would be happy to substitute your word of usage as a side note, because that's really what I'm referring to. When I say ownership, it's not about restriction or keeping it for yourself. It's about controlling and shaping and guiding the usage of it in a way that is beneficial to your stakeholders. And the stakeholders are the brokerage, the agent, and of course, ultimately that consumer. So to me, that's what ownership, how I would define ownership.
So I am in agreement with that definition, which then makes me go, why are they working with some of these tech companies and giving the data to these companies?
Yeah, and it's so funny you bring that up. I literally came from a conversation where I was reflecting a conversation from earlier today where it's the Wild West. I mean, people are doing things with data, in some cases with absolutely no agreement in place, and that is frightening to me. I mean, granted, I come from more of a corporate background, but that will not end well at some point. And if a $5 billion FTC settlement with Facebook doesn't get your attention, I'm not sure what would. So I do think as an industry, we have a lot of maturing yet to do around this topic. I will say we take that super seriously, and as I described earlier, it's always under the brokerage's control. We have very strict technical mechanisms for the control over the distribution. We have contractual agreements of course, with our brokerage clients, but also with all these partners. That's the only way you're going to get the data is by signing an agreement that obligates you to standards that you have to adhere to, et cetera. So I think hope springs eternal. There's also a lot of fear. I mean, one of the jokes I make is it's good to be an arms dealer during an arms race, and that's really what's going on right now. In the U.S. market, you look at the pressure that Compass has applied, and in more what I would call the traditional brokerage model, even though they're seen as a tech company, it's really a traditional brokerage. And then you have all these new models that you referred to and the new technologies. I think it's causing people to be short-sighted in the traditional brokerage world sometimes, to just knee-jerk and have a thing. It should be more thoughtful, and with that would come more thoughtfulness around the data.
Yeah, so I really do think it's a fear thing, and to me that means it's a lack of a plan thing. And,
yes.
And what would happen if you stopped working with Zillow and Realtor.com, or what would happen? Have you guys thought it through? What would happen if you don't let people advertise your stuff on Facebook? Because they now have a universal right to that data to do whatever they want with it on that platform.
Oh yeah, you're again. We probably need to have more conversation over a beer or something. But I think that's a very intriguing thought. And this whole thing about own your data, control the usage of your data, to use your terminology, Zillow is a great example. The industry did that. The real estate industry gave that data away for free, in return for advertising effectively. Not necessarily, I mean, that's a logical decision, but not necessarily if you were thinking about the long term. If you stood back and thought about it strategically, you may have made a different choice at that time. But to your point, it was kind of a knee jerk and a savings. Oh, let's just do this. And I think the more that we can think things through, I was going to be right anyway, but sometimes just a little more thought up front and defining your business objectives. That's the other thing we see often being missing. It becomes a technology conversation. And I said at the beginning, I'll say it again now. It's not about the technology. It's about what are you trying to do in your business, and then how can the technology be one of many tools, not the only tool, but one of many, that could help you accomplish whatever that business objective is.
No, it's about relationships, like you said at the beginning, and the industry knows that, yet the things they are giving their data to have nothing to do with relationships. It's everything to do with advertising.
Yes.
So
don't hold back now.
Let's talk about sales and marketing, because you're an expert in that in that niche and in that expertise area. And there's a lot of startups that have great products, but you can have a great product, and if you don't know how to market and sell it, you're not going to have a future. And so what are the things that you notice are the differences between the startups that are able to sell and market and grow and make money and those who don't? What are some of those pillars?
Yeah, and it's a huge topic, of course, and I've made a lot of mistakes in my own career in this way. But I'll go back to what I said about my background. I said, and I do have a computer science degree, and I loved the technology at the beginning, and I still, to this day, love it. But ultimately, it's not about the technology. It's about solving people's problems. So the first thing I would suggest is from the very beginnings of even an idea that leads to a startup, you really have to validate what is it that you think you're solving. Is that in fact interesting, important, et cetera, to this prospective market segment and customer base you're trying to go after? Because that then powers everything else. Powers how you build the product, powers how you market it, powers how you sell it. Second thing I would say is, and this is something I say to this day at Moxi, keep your focus outside the building. One of the things we all, and you're in real estate and you have your own company and you're a sales and marketing guy, I can tell. So to you this comes more naturally, but for most people, selling is a conflict situation, right? I'm trying to get you to do something you might not want to do. And therefore, the tendency, particularly for entrepreneurs that are more technically minded or more product oriented, is, gosh, I could cold call that company I'd really love to have be our customer, but I don't know anybody there, and it's going to be weird, and they're probably not going to pick up. I'll have to leave a voicemail. That's awkward. I'll just work on my product some more. Right?
Yeah.
And you see this actually in small business. How many restaurants do you see where they have an incredible long build out, and it's this amazing thing, and then it fails because they never marketed it, and they spent too much on the product. So my view is minimum viable product. Validate your assumptions with actual customers, minimum viable product, and go to market. Until you go to market, you have no idea, even having done a lot of research, you have no idea what's really going to happen. So get out there. Final thing I'll say is this. and I'm an optimist. We talked about it earlier. So I like to focus on things that are going to make people better and are going to allow them to perform better. But the reality is that human beings are motivated 2 times by fear versus what could make them better, right? So if you have a product that can address a fear, it's probably an easier sale. So.
And what methods, do you think there's some just tried and true methods that companies need to be deploying to do sales and marketing, and they're trying to find the salesperson-less way of sales and marketing, and it's just like, hey, stop trying to do that, just pick up the phone, go to trade shows? Like,
yeah, you know, as you can tell, I'm a geezer, so I probably have my biases, but I will say that I do feel like what you just addressed is an important factor that's absent in a lot of these startups, because so much of the internet era of business has relied on automation and, crucially, consumer-facing things, where you really aren't doing the belly-to-belly stuff over some small transaction type of thing, or frankly an ad-supported model where there's an implicit transaction. But if you're trying to sell something that's got a fair amount of value in a business context to an individual like an agent, or in our case a brokerage, yeah, we're here at Inman, you're doing this in your business as well. You've got to be face-to-face, or at least phone-to-phone, for some significant part of building that relationship. People buy things from people they like. Yeah. That's the other advice I'd give you. And it's very hard to be likable through a computer.
6 times more likely.
Yes.
Realtors need to understand that too.
They do. They absolutely do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Final thing. So you've had lots of businesses and you've done partnerships, and I know personally, and I know lots of startups were like, we know we need to do partnerships, but like, how do these deals work where everyone feels like they're winning? What are some of the things that you think about when trying to do a good partnership deal?
It's an excellent question. I guess there are a couple headlines for me. One is, I mentioned earlier, you have to truly have a sort of a not invented here ethos behind it. If you are at all holding back somehow, you're never, either you won't get it done or it will fail in its implementation. So it truly has to be genuinely complementary on both sides. And everybody talks about win-win, and it's a trite-ism, but you truly have to think of it that way. And then the second piece of advice I'd give, which relates to that, is as human beings, and this is just a natural thing of how human beings operate, it's not wrong, we tend to think of the problem we have and what are we trying to solve. So what are we going to get out of this deal? And I think an epiphanal thing that was said to me early in my career is think about the monkey on the other person's back. Not in a nefarious or take advantage of them sense, but just try and put yourself in their shoes and frankly just listen to them, truly listen to them when they talk. They'll tell you what is important and what it is that you're trying to put together, and then just try as much as you can to accommodate that without deprecating your own position in it, but just do your best to help them solve their problem. So don't focus just on your problem, focus frankly disproportionately on their problem, and I think you'll have a lot more success. And you'll also frankly build a better relationship, as we talked about.
For all the people that want to, have the experience you've had and be as skilled as you are, what are some of the books or people that you've followed and read up on that have helped you, shape your career and have influenced you to be better?
Wow, there's a long list. It's more people than it is books. I mean, I do read stuff, of course. What it says above my door, what got you here won't get you there. That's a book title that's interesting. Getting to Yes is another one. These are classic books. Crossing the Chasm, escapes me now, but Crossing the Chasm as a concept, what it takes to be successful in an early adopter market versus a mainstream market. These are all things that I think are worthwhile reading. And to me, the classics, again, maybe a geezer comment, but the classics, a lot of stuff really has not changed. Particularly things that are about creating relationship, like Getting to Yes. But for me personally, it's really been about the people that I've been so fortunate to have mentor me along the way. And I think there's extraordinary good fortune that I've had in that. So for instance, I was at Microsoft in the early 90s, and the role that I had there, I ran a group called Corporate Account Technical Marketing. And for reasons I won't go into, that group had a lot of focus within Microsoft because we were sort of the tip of the spear of getting Microsoft's platform into the corporate IT setting. And that was important to management and to leadership. So I got an opportunity to work a little bit with Bill Gates, but a lot with Steve Ballmer, who was an extraordinary mentor to me personally at the time. And people have their opinions, but frankly, I don't care. It was super valuable to me.
That's cool.
And then I could go on with many, many others. But here's the trick I would say, the advice I guess I would give someone is just don't be shy. Seek those people out. Most, and not all, some are jerks, but most people, and I try to do this now, particularly when you're further in your career, you want to help. Yeah. Right? You look forward to helping people that are intellectually curious, which is one of the things that I look for in a quality in any employee. It's that intellectual curiosity will be fed automatically when detected by people that are willing to mentor you. And then the second is just engage, right? So much, and I was like this at points, like, ooh, I can't talk to him. He's so-and-so. Yeah. But just go talk to him. Everybody's a human being, right?
I've learned to figure out that habit of ooh, I want to go talk to that person. Just do it now. Just go now. Just go now.
Yes, you got it. And you do have to. It's what we talked about. Humans are conflict averse and fearful. That's our nature, generally, our default state. So you have to forcibly sort of overcome that. But like I say, everyone's a human being. And the other thing, as you have done here, I have to give you this compliment. You did the research. We've never met before. Yeah. But you, before we came on camera even, you knew something about me and you had things you could say that were icebreakers that would cause us to engage in a conversation. So just do your homework. You can't always do it if you're in some situation you run into someone. Yeah. But if you really want to get to know someone, be proactive and do the research and then approach them. So
cool,
that'd be my advice.
Thanks for being on the show.
Really appreciate it. Appreciate
your time. And hey, if you guys don't want to learn from other great leaders, then don't subscribe to this show. But I'm pretty sure you do because you guys are all in the real estate space. So if you want to continue to be great and be better in the industry, then subscribe to the YouTube show and the podcast so you can learn from more great people like York Baur. Thanks again for being on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you.